All right, I think we are live now. Sorry about the short delay to get things started there. I am admittedly not a very techie person. For as much podcasting and video work as I do, I'm not overly good at the intricacies of it. But here we are. At least I think so. I hope so. And we are live for the first episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. So we'll go ahead and get right into it here. So a few things off the top as I let some people get involved, and I just tweeted out the link, so you should be able to find it there as well, and we'll get rolling here soon. But a few things. Um, this is going to be a show every Wednesday around 12:30. Obviously, today we got started a couple minutes late, but we're going to primarily just dive into one, sometimes maybe two topics each Wednesday that are generally pertinent to the week or something going on in the world of college basketball. And then my typical Brandon Ramsey college basketball show episodes will continue to live on Mondays and Fridays. Those will usually go live around 9 a.m. So make sure you're subscribed here to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel, where you'll find All Fired Up each Wednesday live at 12:30. And as some people join our discussion here today, we'll give them a couple more minutes before we get started here, so bear with me. But thank you to those who have tuned in thus far. Hopefully everything sounds okay. I'm sure we will continue to get better at this as we go along. But today we're talking about scheduling in college basketball. Kind of a hot topic here in these first couple of days since the season got started on November 6th. Quite frankly, there's just not been that many exciting games. Obviously, for college basketball junkies like myself, or probably anybody who would be listening to a live show on a Wednesday afternoon about college basketball, you and I are going to watch all the games no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's Marist against Radford or whether it's Baylor versus Auburn, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. We're going to watch all the games no matter what. Certainly our team's games, but then even on a national scale, we're going to watch all of them no matter what. So it's not going to make a whole lot of a difference. However, for the casual fan, admittedly, the start to the season, hasn't hasn't been all that exciting. Probably, I think that last night, the Auburn Baylor game certainly lived up to the hype. That was everything we wanted it to be, probably needed it to be to somewhat unofficially tip off the college basketball season. But otherwise, there just haven't been that many great games. And is that a problem? I don't know. We'll touch on that as we go along over these next several minutes. But on opening day, it's kind of funny because we sit here and we all talk ourselves into like how great of a game Oregon Georgia is. Now, this wasn't a football game. This was a basketball game between Oregon and Georgia. And college basketball pundits like myself, we all treated it like it was a Final Four game almost because it was 4:30 on Monday. We had just finished watching IUPUI play Spalding, most likely earlier in the day. We were excited for two power conference teams to play each other. Now, neither one of those teams are great. The game wasn't that good. Georgia was bad. Oregon controlled controlled the entire game, and I don't think Oregon's very good either. Probably a middle of the Pac-12 team at best. But that was like a game that we were all excited about, and there's obviously reasons why teams are hesitant to schedule marquee games early in the season. You're usually not your best on November 6th or November 8th or really anytime in November. You need some time to get into game shape. Exhibitions are just never going to be the same as real life Division One college basketball games that count for something. A lot of programs are trying to steal a couple more tune-up opportunities going into the year, and that's just it. That is just what it is. Even with the exhibitions and the off-season time that you're allowed to spend together at the Division One level, some of these teams are taking international trips, all that good stuff. Teams still want to build in um, a couple more, essentially exhibition games to start the season, and the few teams that don't do that, we really applaud right now because it gives us something exciting to watch. on opening night, we had USC and Kansas State, which was at least a high profile game. I mean, we got to see Isaiah Collier, arguably the best freshman in the country, right off the bat on opening night. I already talked about that Oregon Georgia game, which if that was played on January 3rd, it would be the 14th best game of the day or whatever. Well, it was probably the second best game of the day on opening day. Then the only other top 100 KenPom matchup of that opening day, I labeled it kind of the old school bracket buster sort of game between UAB and Bradley, which lived up to the hype. Certainly, if you're into mid-major basketball, that was a circled game for you. UAB at home lost in overtime to Bradley, 73-71 in that one. Then we got a similar game last night, actually, between North Texas and Northern Iowa. Also went to overtime. North Texas won that one, 83-77. Another one of the very few early season top 100 KenPom matchups. The other game, certainly to watch last evening, was Baylor and Auburn, which I think we'll probably dive into just a little bit later in the podcast. But I would also applaud some other teams. Like it doesn't always have to be this, super glamorous, top 25 matchup. That there are other ways to play good teams, and those of us that really know college basketball know what those matchups are. For example, Indiana. I'll give Indiana credit. They scheduled Florida Gulf Coast for their opener to the season. That's a team that's picked to win the A-Sun. Like that's a real league, a real team, coached by Pat Chambers, who's formerly at Penn State. That is a good first game and an exciting game for people to get involved in, because it doesn't matter what the conference is. And this is something casual fans aren't going to necessarily want to hear this or even care. And that's okay. But for people that are really into college basketball, if you're picked to win your league, you're pretty darn good. And you're going to have a chance to play with people like Indiana. So Florida Gulf Coast certainly did that last night. I think there was a shot in the air to cut it to 1 with maybe a minute to go or whatever. Florida Gulf Coast led in the second half a couple of different times. But that's a team that's going to potentially win the Atlantic Sun going to play IU in the first game. I applaud the Hoosiers for scheduling that sort of opponent. Similarly, Michigan, another Big Ten team, they scheduled UNC Asheville for their home opener. That's a team that might win the Big South Conference. So you have some high-profile Big Ten teams. No, they're not playing another power conference team. They're not playing a top 25 team, but they went out and found teams that are very possibly NCAA tournament teams that are going to win their leagues and played them on opening night. Now, Michigan was much more impressive than Indiana was. Indiana, typical struggles in terms of handling the ball. Guard play did not look very good last night. Shooting the ball, they really struggled, especially at the free throw line, but from three-point range, some as well. I thought Khalil Ware absolutely looked the part. He looked like a very competent Big Ten 5-man that's going to hold his own, not just defensively, but I thought he did some good things offensively. He looked good on the roll a few times, certainly athletic and bouncy around the basket. So I applaud those teams for scheduling games like that. Now, for other teams, let's take my Kentucky Wildcats. You can see the UK behind me. I'm wearing my Kentucky Sports Radio hat, all that good stuff. Kentucky schedules, and of course, when they scheduled this game, they didn't know that the New Mexico State thing was going to turn into a dumpster fire. But that actually probably would have been one of these games that I was just talking about, because New Mexico State just 2 years ago played in the second round of the NCAA tournament. So actually, that's probably not a great example of what I want to talk about. But you have other teams. Purdue playing Samford. Now, Samford, I don't know, another probably not a great example. They're going to pick towards the top of the Southern Conference. But Houston, they're playing Louisiana Monroe, one of the worst teams in the country. They win by over 50 points on opening night. You have Kansas similarly playing North Carolina Central, one of the worst teams in the country. You have Connecticut playing Northern Arizona, not a good team. You have Gonzaga, who has not played yet, but they, on the other side of the coin, their first game, it's against Yale. That's a team that's a really good opening matchup. That's a top 75 KenPom team. That's a team that's going to be picked to win the Ivy League. That returns the Ivy League Player of the Year in Matt Noling this year. That's going to be a really good team. Arizona, they played Morgan State, who I keep saying one of the worst teams in college basketball. Morgan State might be like bottom 5 or 10 in the country. I think Arizona scored like 122 points in that game. So this is where, some of my takes probably differ from a lot of people, and something that I'll probably talk about more probably in a different all fired up episode is how coaching myself sort of ruined my fandom, so to speak. And obviously, somewhat for dramatic effect, that sounds like more intense than it is. I'm a crazy Kentucky fan. I'm a crazy college basketball fan still to this day, even after 5 years of coaching college basketball. But what I mean by that is that I see the intricacies of what goes into scheduling on all these different things a little bit differently than what your average fan how they may see it. And I think that as a fan, your job is to support your team, and the coach's job is to put the best product on the court. And if your coach thinks that the best way to do that is by playing Texas A&M Commerce and Morgan State and IUPUI in the first 3 games, then I think your job is to sit there, watch the games, and clap for them. I know that comes off very strong. That's why the podcast is called All Fired Up. That's what we're doing here. But I don't necessarily believe that. Well, I will never believe that programs owe it to anybody to play high-profile games. It's not their job to worry about the greater good of college basketball. It's not their job to worry about the season ticket holders, in my opinion. Like those people, there's always going to be more of those. Like people can sit here and say, like, well, if you don't worry about the fans, then they're going to stop coming. No, well, first of all, no, they're not. And second of all, if those guys stop coming, then somebody else is still going to come and support the team. I vehemently believe that. Feel free to sound off in the chat if you disagree. That's what that's why we're doing this platform live. I want to have those sort of conversations, but I think there's probably a delicate balance here. Now, the reason why you don't get good early season games is what James Madison did to Michigan State on opening night. Again, James Madison is a team that is picked to win the Sun Belt Conference. Sun Belt's a good league, and that they're going to turn around and play Kent State in a really high-level mid-major matchup that's going to mean even more now after what James Madison did on opening night to Michigan State. But coaches don't want to be in that situation. That's why I applauded Michigan and IU for those games last night, because those are similar teams to what James Madison is, teams that are picked to win their respective league. And teams like that can beat major conference teams. And most major conference coaches don't want to have to play those games early on. And the thing that I will say to probably defend them some is some of these mid-major schools, whether it be Florida Gulf Coast or James Madison or even the upper level teams, like think of North Texas, think of Bradley, even think of some of the teams in the Mountain West that are potentially at-large teams, like your San Diego States, your New Mexicos of the world, who are vying for at-large bids this season. They need to play some of these games because they need quality wins come Selection Sunday. Your Purdue's and your Kentucky's and your Gonzagas, they don't need those quality wins because they're going to come through the conference schedule. So yes, some of these power conference teams play lesser schedules in November and December, but that's because in January, February, and March, they get no off nights. None. Like, try going to South Carolina and then going to Vandy, like a back-to-back Wednesday, Saturday. I'm sorry, and I love low to mid-major Division I basketball, but like that's a lot different than going to Coppin State and Hampton on back-to-back nights. It just is. And when you're one of these high major coaches, like you have all these tests coming, you don't need to throw your team to the fire and potentially trip up a few extra times early in the season. You want to build confidence. You want to build a winning resume going into what will be a very tough league schedule. And I can see it both ways. Like, I think there's something to be said for testing yourself early on, sort of to get an early barometer. I mean, for example, last night, the Baylor Auburn game, who is kind of the genesis of this conversation, because Coach Bruce Pearl and Coach Scott Drew a lot of praise for playing that game out in Sioux Falls at the Pentagon. But nobody's really talking down about Auburn today. In fact, I think obviously Baylor won the game and they they deserve to be lauded for that. And I think they have been on a national level, but everybody came away just as impressed with Auburn. And people are singing their praises today, too, not just for playing the game, but for how they played it. I mean, for much of the game, they were leading. They probably should have won the game. They just let it slip away from them a little bit late. So you can have some situations where people do understand losing some of these early season games if you play a quality opponent. So I think something can be said for there being benefits to it. But I also understand why coaches want to um, to play the games that they play. I understand why Kentucky plays Texas A&M Commerce on Friday nights because they already got to play Texas A&M, the real Texas A&M, later in the season, and they got to go to their place. So like, what? Why do I want to go schedule the team that's like I don't want to go play Akron, who's going to potentially win the MAC. I don't want to go play Akron on Friday, November 10th. I would rather play Texas A&M Commerce because I want to work on our stuff. I just want to get a little bit of film to show our guys, and I want to move on because also some of a lot of these power conference teams now, because of different TV contracts or things, like they're already obligated to play some pretty big time games. We used to have the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Now you have the SEC Big 12 Challenge. You have teams playing in the Champions Classic. You have teams going to Maui. All these different things. Like I don't know of very many Power 5, Power 6, should say, for basketball schools that are just going 11 or 12 cupcakes in the non-conference. Most teams play a couple good games. And sure, would it be awesome if a few more of them were early in the year? Yes, but I don't think that's necessarily for us to worry about. We are excited for college basketball to be here one way or another. Um, so that's what I wanted to talk about today. I think most of these episodes, depending on some questions that we're going to get, will generally be pretty shorter. Probably 15 to 30 minutes would be my goal. Because we got started a little late, I would be willing to go a little longer. But unless anybody has burning questions, we can probably start to wrap things up here shortly for this first conversation. And hopefully, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm flying blind here a little bit. I don't know if this is even working. I don't know if anybody is listening to this. I don't know if anybody ever will listen to this. So this might have been a nice conversation with myself. I don't know. Hopefully, you listen to it, or at least can listen to it. If you're not here live, hopefully you can listen to it at your leisure throughout the day. But some of my big picture takeaways about early season scheduling, like I said, just like anybody else, I would love for there to be some higher profile games the first couple of nights, but like we get the Champions Classic next Tuesday. Like I'm not that interested. I'm not that concerned about waiting a week to have big time basketball. And there's enough games sprinkled in. And like I said, I can fully understand why uh, why coaches do what they do. As I said, James Madison goes and beats Michigan State. It's 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 not always what you want to throw yourself to the fire on November 6th when you don't even know what you have in your own locker room, and these other teams are playing for so much more than generally you are. That it's the old, think about back in high school when you're playing shell drill against the JV and how frustrating it is when you can't get 2 stops or 3 stops in a row because little Jimmy is making 30 footers because there's no consequences to shooting it. Like that's how some of these smaller schools can play in these early season games because they are playing with really nothing to lose, whereas Michigan State or Kentucky or IU or Michigan or Arizona, any of these teams like that, they have everything to lose because they're the talk of ESPN and podcasts like mine and everybody else for 24 hours when they lose. And it's like, hey, James Madison's really darn good. They might win their league this year. But I digress. I think that we will see probably events like what goes on in Sioux Falls. Like they're going to try to take advantage of some of these early openings, just from a marketing standpoint of putting some of these games earlier in the season. But I think you're just always going to have pushback from a lot of high major coaches that would rather ease into things a little bit more because they already have so many tough games that they have to play. They don't have to go out of their way to schedule tough games. They're put on their schedule by their respective leagues. So that's my 2 cents on that topic. Any of you out there, Dalton, I see you're in the chat. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you all tuning in live, maybe on your lunch break or wherever you may be today for the first episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey here on YouTube. We will continue to do this every Wednesday at 12:30. Obviously, if you missed the show and you're listening via podcast or whatever, I appreciate you guys as well. You can always drop some comments to me at BRamseyKSR on Twitter. Subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show both here on YouTube to catch the All Fired Up episodes, but then also on Spotify or wherever you may listen to your podcast to get the Monday and Friday Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show episodes. So we will be back Friday morning to talk about the first week of college basketball on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show Friday morning. Thank you all so much for listening and being a part of the inaugural All Fired Up episode with Brandon Ramsey. Thank you.